The stagecoach wheels groaned to a stop in a cloud of fine prairie dust, the sound cutting through the late afternoon like a warning. Willa stepped down onto the uneven boardwalk, her worn boots sinking slightly into the dirt. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the vast, empty sky seemed to press down upon her. This was supposed to be her new beginning, yet from the very first moment, the hostile stares pinned her in place. "Would you look at the size of her?" A sharp voice sneered from the gathered crowd. Big as a mountain and marked up like some old trail map. Laughter rippled through the small group of townsfolk, cruel and biting. Willa's full figure, with its soft curves and ample presence, had always drawn such comments, but combined with the jagged scar that traced from her left temple across her cheek, it made her an easy target. She clutched her single carpetbag tighter, the fabric rough against her palms. The journey west had been long and grueling, but nothing compared to this arrival. Her own blood relatives, her late husband's kin, had betrayed her in the most devastating way. After her husband's sudden death revealed his debts and infidelities, they had packed her off avec hot promises of a respectable match in the territories. "It'll be better for everyone," her sister-in-law had written coldly. Now here she was, abandoned once more, with no one waiting and no safe harbor in sight. The prairie wind whipped around her, carrying the sharp earthy scent of sagebrush and sun-baked soil. It tugged at her faded blue calico dress, pressing the material against her wide hips and soft belly. Willa lifted her chin slightly, a subtle act of defiance even as her hazel eyes glistened with unshed tears. She would not let them see her break, not yet. If this tale of quiet resilience in the face of heartbreak touches your soul, Mott invites you to like this story. Subscribe for more heartwarming frontier romances. And leave a comment sharing what you think Willa should do next in this unforgiving land. Old Mr. Harlan, the stagecoach driver, climbed down and handed her the rest of her small bundle with a gentle nod. "You take care now, Miss Willa," he murmured kindly, the only warmth in the cold reception. It was a small gesture, but it landed like a soft blanket on her weary spirit. She offered him a grateful smile, the first in days. As she walked down the main street, the whispers followed, like shadows. Shopkeepers turned away. Women pulled their children closer as if her presence might taint them. Willa felt the weight of every mocking glance. Her mind drifted back to the letter that had shattered her last hope. "We cannot support you any longer," it had said. Betrayed by blood, the very people who should have protected her after her loss. Her husband had left her nothing but pain, and his family had cast her out like an unwanted burden. The quiet emotional reflection settled heavily in her chest. How could family turn so cruelly against their own? She paused near the general store, the wooden sign creaking in the wind. The sensory moment of the afternoon sun warming her scarred cheek contrasted with the chill in her heart. Dust particles danced in the golden light, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Willa smoothed her apron kept, hot calloused hands, a subtle behavior showing her desire to appear presentable despite everything. Inside the store, she humbly inquired about work. "Mort can cook. Clean. So anything you need," she said softly. The shopkeeper's wife looked her up and down and laughed outright. "We don't need your kind here, dear. This town has standards." Stung. But Willa held her composure. Yet there were small warmth beats even in this harsh place. A young boy, no older than 8, paused while chasing a hoop and stared at her scar not with fear but curiosity. When their eyes met, he offered a shy smile before running off. It was fleeting, but it reminded Willa of the innocence that still existed. Later, she helped an elderly woman pick up dropped parcels when no one else bothered, earning a murmured "thank you" child that eased some of the ache in her soul. And in her bag, she discovered a small embroidered handkerchief from a distant friend back east, a token of kindness that she pressed to her chest for a moment of comfort. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the prairie in hues of orange and pink, Willa found herself without lodging. The boarding house turned her away with sneers about taking up too much space. She sat on a wooden bench outside the livery stable, the cool evening air settling around her shoulders like an unwelcome embrace. Her thoughts turned to the future. How would she survive the coming winter in this unfriendly town? The betrayal by her blood relatives left her truly alone for the first time. The giant shadows of the mountains loomed in the distance, and Willa wondered if any soul in this vast land might see beyond her scars and sighs to the resilient heart within. She closed her eyes, sending up a silent prayer for strength. Suddenly, from across the street, she heard two men talking in low voices. That big widow they sent out, they replanning to make sport of her at tomorrow's labor auction. Mark my words, she'll be the laughingstock. The words hit her like a cold gust. Her eyes flew open, heart racing. They kept ite hot, fresh dread. What new cruelty awaited her at this auction they spoke of? And in the fading light, she caught the briefest glimpse of a massive figure standing silently at the edge of town, watching everything unfold with an unreadable expression. Who was he? And why did his presence send an unexpected flutter through her chest amid the fear? The massive figure lingered at the edge of her vision like a distant mountain peak, unmoving and shrouded in the gathering dusk, before the shadows swallowed him whole. Willa drew a shaky breath, pushing the strange flutter aside as she rose from the wooden bench. The cool evening air nipped at her skin, carrying the faint, bitter tang of wood smoke from distant chimneys. She could not sit idle any longer. Survival demanded action. Clutching her carpet bag, she made her way back toward the general store, her boots scuffing softly against the boardwalk planks worn smooth by years of frontier feet. The store S-bell jangled as she pushed open the door, the sound sharp in the quiet interior lined with barrels of flour and bolts of calico. Lantern light flickered across the shelves, casting long shadows that seemed to mock her every step. Willa approached the counter with quiet determination, her full figure moving with a grace born of necessity rather than ease. "Ma'am," she murmured to the shopkeeper's wife, who was stacking tins behind the register. "Moat can mend clothes finer than most, bake bread that lasts a week in the coldest larder, and keep a household running smooth as Riverstone. If there's any work, any at all, I look gloom take it. Room and board would suffice." The woman paused, her eyes narrowing as they swept over Willa's ample curves and the jagged scar that pulled at her cheek. A sharp laugh escaped her lips, drawing the attention of two customers browsing nearby. "Work? From you," she sneered, loud enough for the whole store to hear. "Look at the size of her, Martha. She'd eat us out of house and home before she lifted a finger." The customers joined in, their chuckles low and biting, one man whispering just loud enough, big as a barn and marked like a battlefield. Who'd you trust her near their hearth? Willa felt the heat rise in her face, but she held her ground, her hazel eyes steady. This was the seeking she had come for, a chance to prove her worth through the skills her mother had taught her long ago. Yet the mockery pressed in like the prairie wind before a storm. She offered no retort, only a subtle character behavior. Her calloused fingers gently smoothing the frayed edge of her shawl, drawing it a fraction tighter over her shoulders as if to shield the scar from their stares. It was a small act of quiet dignity, one that cost her more than words ever could. A sensory moment washed over her then. The rich, yeasty aroma of fresh-baked bread drifting in from the bakery next door through the open window, mingling with the sharp, earthy scent of spilled coffee beans on the floor. It reminded her of simpler times, of kitchens filled with warmth instead of this cold judgment. But the quiet, emotional reflection settled deeper in her chest. Betrayed by blood and now rejected by strangers, she wondered how long her resilient spirit could endure. The coming winter loomed in her thoughts like a dark cloud over the horizon. How would she survive it without shelter, without honest work to fill her hands and steady her heart? The vast prairie offered no mercy to the unfit, and in their eyes, her size and scar marked her as just that. Yet even here, amid the cruelty, three small warmth beats flickered like embers refusing to die. First, a tow-headed boy of about 6, hiding behind his mother's skirts, slipped a small, slightly bruised apple from his pocket and pressed it into Willa's hand, with a shy grin before darting away. The simple kindness warmed her palm and her soul, a reminder that not all eyes saw only flaws. Second, an elderly man in faded overalls, leaning on a cane near the seed sacks, caught her gaze and gave a slow, approving nod. "Skills like yours built this town once," he murmured gruffly, the words barely audible, but landing like a gentle hand on her shoulder. And third, as Willa stepped back outside after the shopkeeper's wife waved her away with another laugh, a stray hound with a matted coat trotted up, tail wagging low and hopeful. It nudged her leg once, as if sensing the ache in her, before loping off into the twilight, another fleeting connection in a world that felt so vast and empty. The townsfolk spilled out behind her, their voices carrying on the evening breeze. "Heard they re-auctioning off odd jobs tomorrow. At the livery," one woman said vacate hot, a mocking lilt. "Maybe the big widow can bid on sweeping floors, if she done to break the broom first." Laughter followed, cruel and echoing, but Willa kept walking, her steps measured toward the livery stable, where she hoped for even a hayloft corner to sleep. The questions about winter survival gnawed at her. The biting winds, the snow that could bury a body whole, the hunger that came when work was denied. She had no family left to turn to, no coin to buy favor, only her hands, skilled and willing, and a heart that refused to harden completely. As the stars began to prick the deepening sky, she reached the livery and spoke softly to the stable hand about any chores in exchange for shelter. He eyed her, up and down, then shook his head with a sneer. "Ain't no room for the likes of you here, miss. Try the church steps if you re that desperate." The rejection stung fresh, but she murmured a polite thanks and turned away, the cool night air now carrying the distant low of cattle and the faint crackle of a far-off campfire. In the quiet reflection of that moment, Willa paused beneath a lone cottonwood tree, its leaves rustling like whispered secrets. She thought of the children she might never hold, the home she dreamed of building, despite everything. Reluctant as she felt toward any new ties after her losses, the idea of using her homemaking skills to create even a sliver of warmth for others tugged at her. It was all she had left to offer. Then, from the shadows near the livery corral, the massive figure reappeared, closer now, his towering frame silhouetted against the fading orange of the prairie sky. He stood watching her, silent as the mountains themselves, his presence stirring something unspoken in the air between them. Before Willa could gather her thoughts or take another step, a town crier's voice rang out from the main street, loud and official: "Labor auction at dawn tomorrow. All able hands and those seeking work, step up or step aside." The words hung heavy, laced with the promise of more public jests, at Motfi her expense. And in that instant, the giant shifted, his broad shoulders turning as if he might finally step forward, leaving Willa frozen in place, heart pounding with a question that refused to fade. Would this stranger prove friend, or another shadow in her endless search for shelter? The town crier's voice faded into the night, but the words about the labor auction at dawn lingered in the cooling air like an unspoken threat. Willa stood frozen beneath the cottonwood, her carpetbag heavy in her hands, when the massive figure finally stepped forward from the shadows of the livery corral. He was enormous, a true giant of a man, towering well over 6.5 feet, with shoulders broad enough to block out the emerging stars. Gideon called him in hushed tones around town, though few dared speak to him directly. His presence commanded the prairie itself. He moved with deliberate slowness, each step of his worn cowboy boots sending a low thud against the hard-packed earth. The mockers who had followed her from the general store, 3 men and 2 women, still chuckling over their earlier jabs, fell silent the instant they noticed him approaching. Their cruel laughter died in their throats. One man, the loudest of the group, took an involuntary step backward, muttering something under his breath before turning away entirely. The others, scattered like startled prairie dogs, disappearing into the gathering darkness without another word. Gideon's stoic face remained unreadable, his piercing blue eyes steady beneath the brim of his hat, but his sheer size and quiet authority acted as a shield, clearing the space around Willa in mere moments. Willa's breath caught. She had never seen a man so large, yet his movements held no threat, only a profound mountain-like steadiness. The sensory moment arrived as a soft night breeze carried the rich, sweet scent of fresh hay from the livery, mixed with the faint, comforting smell of leather and wood smoke clinging to his clothes. It wrapped around her like an unexpected embrace. after the sharp cruelties. She stood a little straighter, a subtle character behavior, revealing her quiet dignity even as her scarred cheek flushed with surprise. Gideon stopped a respectful distance away, his massive frame casting a long shadow that somehow felt protective, rather than intimidating. For the first time since stepping off the stagecoach, Willa did not feel completely alone under the vast prairie sky. In the quiet emotional reflection that followed, she wondered how it was possible for one man's silent arrival to shift the very air around her. After the betrayal by her own blood, after the sneering rejections for work and shelter. This stranger's presence stirred something fragile and warm deep in her chest. A tiny spark of hope that perhaps not every soul in this land would see her only as the big scarred widow to be mocked. 3 small warmth beats bloomed in quick succession. First, Gideon gave a single, slow nod toward the livery stable hand who had turned her away earlier. The man immediately busied himself with tasks and avoided looking in Willa's direction again. Second, a mother passing by with her young daughter paused briefly, the little girl waving shyly at Willa before her mother gently guided her, along with a softer expression than before. Third, Gideon reached into his vest pocket and wordlessly offered her a small, clean handkerchief, his large hand surprisingly gentle as he extended it. Willa accepted it with a murmured, "Thank you," her fingers brushing his for the briefest instant. The cloth smelled faintly of sage and honest work. He did not speak at first. When he did, his voice was low, deep, and authoritative, the kind of voice that carried weight without needing volume. "You need a place," he stated simply, not as a question but as fact. It was not pity in his tone, only quiet certainty. Willa met his eyes then, her hazel gaze locking with his piercing blue ones for a long, unspoken moment. In that brief connection, a subtle warmth sparked between them, like the first glow of a campfire on a cold night. She saw no mockery there, no judgment of her size or her scar, only a steady recognition of her resilience. The giant cowboy stood as a living embodiment of public protection, his mere presence enough to silence the town's cruelty. Willa felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly, the weight of the day's rejections lifting just enough for her to draw a fuller breath. Yet questions swirled in her mind. Why would this towering man step in for a stranger? What did he see when he looked at her that others did not? Gideon gestured toward a small path leading away from the main street, his movement unhurried. "My land has a cabin, empty, you can stay." The offer hung in the night air, simple and powerful, much like the man himself. Willa hesitated, her heart pounding with a mix of caution and unexpected gratitude. She had learned too well how quickly kindness could turn to betrayal. Before she could form a reply, one of the townsmen who had scattered earlier reappeared at a safe distance, calling out with renewed but shaky venom. "Careful there, Gideon. Taking in that big scarred widow already. Folks will talk about the giant and his charity case come morning at the auction." The words were meant to sting, but they died weakly against Gideon's unmoving stance. Willa's eyes widened slightly at the reminder of tomorrow's labor auction. What fresh humiliations awaited her there? And now, with this giant's unexpected protection, she wondered if accepting his offer might change everything or bring an entirely new kind of trouble down upon them both. As Gideon turned his broad shoulders slightly toward the man, his silent authority radiating outward once more, Willa felt the unresolved tension coil tighter in her chest. Would the town turn its cruelty on him next for daring to shield her? Dawn broke over the prairie in streaks of pale gold and rose, the light filtering through the small window of the empty cabin. Gideon had led her to the night before. Willa had slept fitfully on the simple cot, the rough wool blanket a far cry from the rejections of the previous day, yet somehow warmer because of the giant cowboy's silent gesture. She rose early, her full figure moving with hot, practiced care, as she smoothed the faded calico of her dress over her soft belly and wide hips. The jagged scar on her cheek caught the first rays, a reminder she no longer hid from in the mirror. Today was the labor auction, and though Gideon's offer of shelter had eased the immediate ache of homelessness, the town's whispers still echoed in her mind like distant thunder. She stepped out into the crisp morning air, the sensory moment unfolding as the sharp, clean scent of dew kissed Sagebrush mingled with the earthy aroma of turned soil from nearby fields. Birds called overhead, their songs bright against the low murmur of the gathering crowd down by the livery stable. Gideon waited near the path, his towering frame already saddled on a sturdy bay horse that looked small beneath him. He gave her a single nod, short, authoritative, no wasted words, and gestured for her to walk beside him. The subtle character behavior came from Willa, as she adjusted the simple shawl around her shoulders. Fingers lingering a moment longer on the fabric as if drawing strength from the small act of composure. The town square buzzed with hot activity by the time they arrived, a makeshift platform erected beside the livery for the auction of odd jobs and seasonal labor. What should have been a practical gathering for hands to hire had twisted, as frontier events often did, into something uglier under the influence of the crueler residents. Willa felt the shift the instant eyes turned her way. The same shopkeeper's wife from yesterday stood at the front, her voice carrying sharp as a whip. "Step right up, folks. We've got the usual strong backs for the harvest. But look here." The big scarred widow herself, fresh off the stage and desperate for any scrap of work. "Who'll bid on this mountain of a woman? Maybe she can haul twice the load with that size of hers." Laughter erupted, loud and mocking, from the cluster of townsfolk. One man sneered openly, "Bet she eats more than she earns. Call it the widow's tax." Willa stood on the platform's edge as they paraded her forward like some curiosity at a county fair, her cheeks burning beneath the scar. The quiet, emotional reflection settled heavy in her chest. After betrayal by her own blood, after every door slammed in her face for seeking honest work, this public jest stripped away the last fragile shield of dignity. How had it come to this? Her skills in homemaking and quiet resilience reduced to fodder for their cruelty. The vast prairie sky overhead seemed to mock her too, endless and indifferent. Yet she lifted her chin, refusing to shrink, even as questions looped in her mind about how much more a heart could endure before it simply stopped hoping. Gideon remained at the crowd's edge, his massive presence a silent sentinel. He did not shout or push forward. He simply stood, broad shoulders squared, blue eyes steady and piercing. The mockers faltered whenever their gazes flicked his way, their sneers losing some of their bite under his unyielding stare. 3 small warmth beats cut through the chill of the jests, like unexpected sparks. First, the same tow-headed boy from the store yesterday wove through the adult's legs and pressed a small wildflower into Willa's hand, whispering for your pretty eyes before vanishing again. Second, an older ranch hand nearby murmured gruffly to his companion, "Ain't right, treating her like this womus. Got steady hands, moat here." And third, a young mother at the back of the crowd offered Willa a quick, sympathetic smile and a nod of encouragement, her toddler waving chubby fingers in silent solidarity. The auctioneer, egged on by the crowd, continued with exaggerated flair. "Starting bids for the widow's labor, Anion, or shall we let her sweep the streets for scraps?" Bids came low and mocking at first, pennies tossed like insults. Willa kept her gaze fixed on the horizon, the golden prairie stretching beyond the town, like a promise she dared not fully trust. Then Gideon stepped forward. The crowd parted instinctively around his towering form, boots thudding with quiet power. He raised one large hand, voice low and authoritative, cutting through the noise like a blade through rope. $50. Silence fell, heavy and stunned. $50 was more than a season's wage for most hands, a shocking sum that silenced even the loudest sneers. The shopkeeper's wife blinked, her mouth opening and closing without sound. One man whispered harshly, "He's lost his mind, buying the charity case." But Gideon did not waver, his short, powerful presence radiating certainty. He looked straight at Willa, not with pity, but with recognition, the same steady gaze from the night before. The auctioneer stammered, "Sold to Gideon." The gavel came down with a crack that echoed across the square. Validation washed over Willa like warm rain after drought. In that authoritative bid, her worth was declared not as a joke, but as something real and deserving. For the first time since her arrival, the cruel jest had turned, if only for this moment, toward something resembling destiny. She stepped down from the platform, legs steadier than they had felt in weeks, the wildflower still clutched in her fingers. Gideon met her at the base, his massive frame shielding her from the lingering stares as the crowd dispersed with muttered discontent. "Cabin's yours proper now," he stated simply, the words carrying the weight of a promise. "Work if you want, or rest." No long speeches, just truth delivered with quiet power. Willa murmured her thanks, her hazel eyes meeting his blue ones again, a subtle spark of warmth passing between them amid the fading echoes of mockery. Yet as they turned to leave the square together, one of the townsmen, the same loud one from the night before, pushed through with a fresh sneer twisting his face. "Hold on there, giant. Folks are saying you only bid high 'cause you got plans for that big widow. Ain't he just labor you re-after?" The accusation hung ugly in the air, drawing fresh whispers. Willa froze, the warmth of the validation twisting into fresh tension. Gideon turned his broad shoulders toward the man, his stoic expression unchanging. But before he could respond with that short authoritative presence, the town preacher hurried up, face flushed with urgency. "Wait, both of you," the preacher called out, voice carrying across the dispersing crowd. "The circuit judge arrives tomorrow for weddings and such. There's talk of formalizing arrangements for those who took on labor today, including any matches made at auction." His eyes flicked between Gideon and Willa, heavy with implication. The words landed like a stone in still water, rippling outward with questions no one dared voice yet. Willa's heart stuttered in her chest. What had Gideon's bid truly set in motion, and would the town's cruelty now force something far beyond simple shelter or work? The preacher's words hung in the morning air like dust after a stampede, heavy with implication about the circuit judge, and those arrangements born from the auction. Willa felt her pulse quicken, the wildflower still clutched in her fingers, suddenly feeling too fragile for the weight of what tomorrow might bring. Gideon turned his broad shoulders toward the man, his piercing blue eyes steady and unblinking. "We'll see to it in our own time," he stated simply, the short, authoritative words carrying enough finality to make the preacher nod once and step back without further comment. The crowd's lingering sneers faded into uneasy mutters as Gideon placed a gentle, guiding hand near Willa's elbow. Not touching, but close enough to shield her from the stairs, and led her away from the square. They walked the winding path to his land in companionable silence, the prairie stretching wide and golden around them. The small cabin sat nestled against a gentle rise, its weathered logs sturdy yet humble, with a thin curl of smoke already rising from the chimney where Gideon had lit a fire earlier. As they approached, he murmured, "Cabin's yours proper now. Make it what you will." No grand promises, just quiet certainty from the giant cowboy whose lonely heart had long grown accustomed to empty evenings and echoing walls. Willa stepped inside, the sensory moment enveloping her like a long-forgotten embrace, the faint, musty scent of unused pine boards mingling with the clean, sharp tang of fresh split kindling and the distant sweetness of wild prairie grass carried on the breeze through the open door. Sunlight slanted across the rough-hewn table and single cot, dust motes dancing in the golden beams. She set her carpetbag down with deliberate care, her full figure moving with quiet purpose as she began to transform the space. This was her domain now, however temporary, and her homemaking skills, the ones mocked so cruelly in town, would breathe life into these walls. A subtle character behavior revealed her inner resolve. She paused at the doorway, one calloused hand smoothing the faded apron over her soft belly and wide hips, as if gathering the scattered pieces of herself before setting to work. Gideon lingered outside at first, tending to his horse, but she could feel his presence like a steady mountain, guarding the horizon. She rolled up her sleeves and started with the hearth, sweeping away the thin layer of ash with efficient strokes, then arranging the few tin cups and plates into neat rows on the shelf. From her bag, she pulled a small bundle of dried herbs and a precious packet of flour, remnants of her journey west. Soon the cabin filled with the warm, yeasty aroma of simple dough rising for bread. Her hands kneading kept it hot, practiced rhythm, turning the sparse room into something that felt cared for, lived in. In the quiet, emotional reflection that followed, Willa allowed herself a moment by the window, gazing out at the vast prairie while the bread baked. After the betrayal by her blood relatives, after the auction's cruel jests that had reduced her to a spectacle, This small act of homemaking stirred reluctant hope in her chest. Her skills were no longer just survival. They were a quiet offering, a way to repay the giant's unexpected protection. Yet she wondered if a woman like her, big-sized, scarred, and marked by loss, could ever truly belong in such a place, or if tomorrow's judge would force a destiny neither of them had chosen. The thought left an open loop in her heart. What if this warmth was only borrowed time? 3 small warmth beats flickered through the morning, like embers catching flame. First, Gideon stepped inside briefly to fetch a tool, pausing to inhale the rising scent of bread. A rare softness touched the corner of his mouth, though he said nothing, his massive frame filling the doorway in a way that made the cabin feel safe rather than small. Second, a pair of sparrows fluttered to the windowsill, drawn by the crumbs Willa scattered from her preparations, their cheerful chirps drawing a soft smile from her as she watched them share the simple gift. Third, when she stepped out to draw water from the nearby stream, she found a small bundle of fresh eggs left on the stoop, likely from Gideon's henhouse, along with a note in his bold, sparse handwriting, for the table. It was not signed, but the gesture landed gently on her weary spirit. By midday, the cabin had subtly changed. Willa had scrubbed the table until it gleamed, hung her spare shawl as a makeshift curtain to soften the light, and set a small bouquet of prairie wildflowers in a cracked mug at the center. The air now carried the comforting smell of baking bread and a hint of lavender from the herbs she had tucked into the corners. Gideon returned from checking the fences, his boots thudding softly on the threshold. He stood there a long moment, taking in the transformation without a word at first, his stoic face revealing nothing outwardly. Yet in the way, his broad shoulders relaxed a fraction. In the quiet way he accepted the slice of warm bread she offered on a plate, his lonely heart stirred. This giant of a man, who had roamed the mountains and panned rivers in solitude for years, felt the subtle pull of a homey atmosphere he had not known he missed. It touched something deep and guarded within him, a slow burn warmth that contrasted sharply with the town's cruel mockery still echoing from the auction. He murmured, "Smells like home," the words short and powerful, carrying more weight than any flowery speech could. Willa nodded, her hazel eyes meeting his blue ones across the small space, a spark of unspoken understanding passing between them. The cruel townsfolk might sneer at the giant and the big widow, but here in this cabin, something fragile and real was beginning to take root. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the prairie, Willa continued her quiet labors, mending a tear in one of Gideon's spare shirts. They kept it hot, neat, even stitches, her fingers moving with the same resilience that had carried her through every rejection. Gideon watched from the doorway, his presence a silent protector. But the questions about tomorrow as circuit judge lingered unresolved in the air, like gathering storm clouds. Would formal arrangements be pressed upon them, turning this budding warmth into something neither had sought? Willa was wiping the last of the flour from her hands when a distant rider appeared on the horizon, galloping hard toward the cabin. Gideon stepped outside to meet him, his massive frame tensing slightly. The man reined in, face flushed, and called out in a voice loud enough for Willa to hear from within. "Gideon, word from town. The judge is coming early at first light instead of tomorrow, and the shopkeeper's wife is stirring up talk already. Says any auction matches like yours had best be made official by noon, or the whole town Luklung call it improper. Folks are gathering to watch." The rider tipped his hat and wheeled away, leaving dust in his wake. Willa's heart stuttered at the sudden revelation, the open loop of their future snapping tighter. As Gideon turned back toward the cabin, his stoic expression unchanged, but his blue eyes holding a new depth of quiet resolve, she wondered if this first warmth they had shared would be tested before it could fully bloom, or if the prairie itself would force their hands come dawn. The rider's dust still hung in the air like a faint warning as Gideon turned back toward the cabin, his massive frame silhouetted against the prairie sky. His piercing blue eyes met Willa's through the open doorway, steady and unreadable as ever, yet carrying that new depth of quiet resolve. He did not speak of the judge's early arrival at first light or the town's stirring gossip about auction matches. Instead, he murmured simply, "My sister's young ones are coming," arrived on the morning stage. They look lung stay a spell. The words were short, authoritative, leaving no room for questions, yet they eased the tension in Willa's shoulders just enough for her to nod in acceptance. The children, his nieces and nephew, would bring life to the small space, a distraction perhaps from what tomorrow might force upon them both. By mid-afternoon, the wagon rattled up the path, pulled by a steady mule and driven by one of Gideon's ranch hands. Willa stood on the cabin threshold, her full figure framed by the doorway, the faded calico dress smoothed over her soft belly and wide hips. The sensory moment washed over her as the wagon drew near. The bright, carefree laughter of children, mingling with the sweet, dusty scent of sun-warmed prairie grass, and the faint, comforting aroma of the fresh bread she had pulled from the hearth earlier. It was a sound she had not heard in years, not since before her husband's betrayal and death had emptied her world of hot, innocent joy. The children tumbled out with the energy of young colts. 9-year-old Elias, sturdy and wide-eyed, 7-year-old Lila, with braids flying, and 5-year-old little Rose, clutching a rag doll. They spotted Gideon first, rushing to him with whoops of delight, their small arms wrapping as far as they could around his towering legs. He ruffled their hair with one large hand, a rare softness touching his stoic face, but his gaze flicked to Willa, protective and watchful. Willa hesitated on the step, a subtle character behavior, revealing the quiet ache in her heart. She smoothed her apron over her scarred cheek kept a hot, calloused fingers, as if bracing against the possibility of their young eyes, mirroring the town's cruel stares. Yet the children turned to her without pause. Elias grinned up at her, pointing to the scar with unabashed curiosity. "That's a brave mark, ma'am. Like a trail on a map. Did you fight a bear?" Lila giggled and reached for Willa's hand, tugging her toward the cabin. "You look strong. Can we help make cookies? Uncle Gideon said you make things smell like home." Little Rose simply stared for a moment, then beamed and hugged Willa's leg, murmuring, "Pretty lady with the kind eyes." In the quiet, emotional reflection that followed, Willa felt her grieving heart stir with reluctant motherhood. She had long buried dreams of children after the losses that had scarred her deeper than any mark on her face. Betrayed by blood, left childless and alone. These small ones saw not her size or her flaws, but her true worth. The warmth in her hazel eyes, the gentle strength in her capable hands. Their innocent acceptance bloomed something fragile inside her, a tender pull she had sworn never to feel again. How could such pure gazes heal what the world had broken? Yet here it was, slow and unexpected like the first green shoots after a harsh winter. 3 small warmth beats unfolded as the afternoon unfolded into golden light. First, the children helped Willa in the kitchen, their tiny hands patting dough beside hers on the table. Elias declared her cookies the best in the whole prairie, his praise landing like a soft blanket on her soul. Second, Lila braided a strand of prairie grass into Willa's chestnut hair while they sat on the cabin steps, whispering secrets about Uncle Gideon's big heart, drawing a genuine smile from Willa that reached her eyes for the first time in weeks. Third, little Rose fell asleep against Willa's ample lap during story time by the hearth, her small thumb in her mouth, trusting completely in the scarred widow's gentle hold, a trust that wrapped around Willa's reluctant heart like a promise. Gideon watched from the doorway, his silent presence a mountain of protection. He did not hover or interfere, only nodded once when the children begged Willa to show them how to tend the small garden plot behind the cabin. "She knows the land," he stated simply, his short words carrying quiet authority that made the children listen. They kept hot, wide eyes. The giant cowboy's stoic face hid the subtle shift within him. Seeing Willa with his kin stirred a deep protective warmth he had not named yet. The town's cruel mockery, the sneers about the giant and the big widow, felt distant here, powerless against the children's laughter echoing across the prairie. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds, the children played a game of tag around the cabin, their voices rising in delighted shrieks. Willa joined in briefly, her full figure moving with surprising lightness. The reluctant pull of motherhood growing stronger. They kept hot every innocent giggle. She caught Gideon's eye across the yard, and, for a moment, the slow burn connection between them deepened without words. A shared glance that spoke of healing and possibility amid the unresolved pressure of the judge's dawn arrival. yet the warmth carried an undercurrent of tension. The children, unaware of the town's gossip, chattered freely about the big wedding talk they had overheard on the stagecoach ride. "Folks," said Uncle Gideon, "bought a bride at auction." Elias whispered conspiratorially to his sisters, not realizing Willa could hear. "But she ain't no bride yet. They say the judge is coming early to make it proper." Lila nodded solemnly. "And some mean lady in town said if it ain't a done right, the big widow might have to leave." Willa froze mid-step, the quiet emotional reflection crashing back with fresh force. Could the children's pure acceptance survive the cruelty waiting at first light? Gideon stepped closer, his massive frame casting a protective shadow, but before he could murmur a reassuring word, the distant sound of approaching horses cut through the evening air. A small group of townsfolk, led by the shopkeeper's wife, her face twisted in familiar disdain, rode into view on the path, their voices carrying on the breeze with fresh mockery. "There they are, the giant playing house with the scarred widow, and now his kin too," one sneered loudly. "Judge better sort this improper mess come dawn, or the whole prairie will hear how the auction joke turned into a scandal." The children paused their game, eyes wide with confusion, turning to Willa and Gideon for answers. The unresolved emotional tension coiled tight in Willa's chest like a storm on the horizon. Would the judge's early arrival tear apart this fragile new family before it could truly form? Or would the children's eyes of true worth force destiny's hand against the town's cruel tide? The group of townsfolk reined in their horses in front of the cabin, dust swirling around them in the golden evening light. The shopkeeper's wife sat at the front, her face twisted in self-righteous disdain, flanked by 3 men and another woman whose eyes gleamed with malicious delight. "Well, would you look at this cozy little scene?" The shopkeeper's wife sneered loudly, her voice carrying across the yard like a slap. "The giant and his oafish widow have set up their own little family already. What a cruel joke the auction turned into, buying a big scarred widow for $50, and now playing house with his kin right under our noses." The children froze in their game, eyes wide with confusion, their small faces turning toward Willa and Gideon for answers. Little Rose clung tighter to Willa's skirts, while Elias and Lila exchanged uncertain glances. The mockery escalated as the second woman joined in, her tone dripping ve capite hot venom. "Oafish widow indeed. Look at the size of her, eating him out of house and home before the week's out. Folks in town are already spreading the rumor that this whole thing is nothing but a scandal waiting to explode." The auction was meant to be a jest, not a real match. Willa felt the words land heavily on her chest, reopening wounds she thought were beginning to heal in the quiet of the cabin. The sensory moment hit her then. The sharp, acrid smell of the horse's sweat and kicked-up prairie dust mingling with the sweet, lingering aroma of the fresh-baked cookies, still wafting from inside the cabin, creating a jarring contrast that made her stomach twist. She subtly touched the jagged scar on her cheek with trembling fingers, a small protective gesture as she stepped slightly in front of the children, shielding them from the cruel stares. Gideon moved forward with deliberate slowness, his towering frame casting a long protective shadow over the cabin porch. He did not raise his voice or clench his fists. Instead, he simply stood there, broad shoulders squared, his piercing blue eyes steady and unyielding. "Leave," he stated shortly, the single word low and authoritative, carrying more power than any shouted threat. The townsfolk shifted uncomfortably in their saddles, their sneers faltering for a moment under his stoic presence. But the shopkeeper's wife recovered quickly, her laugh sharp and mocking. "Oh, listen to the giant defending his prize," she sneered, leaning forward in her saddle. "The whole town is talking, Gideon. They say you only bid high because no real woman would have you. And now you've saddled yourself with this oafish widow out of pity. Or worse. Rumors are flying that the circuit judge will hear all about it at first light. Some are even calling for the arrangement to be dissolved before it becomes a proper disgrace. What kind of destiny is that? A cruel joke turned into a forced match for the amusement of the prairie." The vicious rumors spread like wildfire in their words, each one testing the budding connection that had begun to form between Willa and Gideon. Whispers of oafish widow and giant fool echoed among them, laced with laughter that made the children flinch. One of the men added with a cruel grin, "Heard tell she's got no skills worth the bread she eats." Bet the cabin's already falling apart under her big hands. Willa held her ground, but inside, the quiet emotional reflection settled deep and heavy. After every betrayal by blood, every public jest at the auction, could this cruel joke ever truly turn into destiny? Or would the town's relentless mockery crush the fragile warmth she had started to feel in this place, leaving her more alone than when she first stepped off the stagecoach? The questions looped unresolved in her heart, a slow burning ache that contrasted sharply with the innocent laughter that had filled the yard only minutes before. Yet even amid the escalating cruelty, 3 small warmth beats flickered like stubborn embers refusing to be extinguished. First, Elias stepped boldly forward, his small voice piping up with surprising courage. "She's not oafish," he declared, fists clenched at his sides as he glared at the riders. "She's nice and she makes the best cookies, and she don't laugh at us like you do." The boy's defense landed softly on Willa's soul, a tiny shield against the storm. Second, Gideon placed one large hand gently on Willa's shoulder, barely a touch, yet steady and reassuring. His silent gesture speaking volumes without a single extra word, reinforcing the public protection that had first drawn her to him. Third, Lila slipped her small hand into Willa's, squeezing tight, while little Rose buried her face in the widow's apron, murmuring, "Don't go away, pretty lady. We like you here." The children's innocent acceptance wrapped around her reluctant heart like a soft blanket, reminding her of the true worth they saw beyond scars and sighs. Gideon did not engage further with the townsfolk. He simply turned his broad back to them slightly, guiding Willa and the children back toward the cabin door with that same short, powerful presence. Inside, he murmured to them, the word carrying quiet authority that made the little ones obey without hesitation. The shopkeeper's wife called after them with one last biting remark. "Mark our words. The judge won't let this stand as is. A public hearing at dawn, they say, to decide if this match from the auction is fit for the prairie. The whole town will be there to watch the joke unravel." Their laughter faded as they wheeled their horses and rode off into the gathering dusk, but the damage lingered in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Willa busied herself inside the cabin, her full figure moving with quiet resilience as she cleared the table and lit another lantern, the soft glow pushing back the shadows. Gideon stood by the window, his massive silhouette watching the path long after the riders had vanished. The slow burn connection between them felt tested now, stretched thin by the vicious rumors, yet somehow stronger in the face of it. He murmured once, "They don't decide us," the short sentence hanging between them like a promise. Willa nodded, her hazel eyes meeting his blue ones across the room. But the open loop of doubt remained. Could destiny truly rise from such pain, or would the cruelty of the townsfolk force them apart before the warmth could fully bloom? As the children settled by the hearth with their cookies, chattering softly to drown out the memory of the sneers, Willa allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection by the door. The prairie wind whispered through the cracks, carrying faint echoes of distant laughter that might have been real or imagined. The budding family felt real here, Gideon's silent protection, the children's pure gazes, but the town's escalating mockery threatened to turn it all into nothing more than the cruel joke they claimed it was. The evening deepened, stars pricking the sky one by one, when a lone rider appeared again on the horizon, galloping hard toward the cabin. Gideon stepped outside to meet him, his frame tense but unmoving. The man reined in, face flushed avec hat urgency, and called out in a voice that carried clearly to Willa inside. "Gideon, the circuit judge sent word ahead. He's arriving before dawn now, not just for the hearing, but to settle any auction arrangements publicly at the town square. The shopkeeper's wife has gathered signatures on a petition calling your match improper. If it ain't made official or dissolved by noon tomorrow, they Luglung take it to the territorial marshal." The rider paused, glancing toward the cabin with a mix of pity and warning. "Folks are saying this could end KPT hot her sent away on the next stage, permanently." Willa's breath caught at the sudden revelation, the unresolved emotional tension snapping tight in her chest like a lasso around her heart. As Gideon turned back toward the door, his stoic expression hiding whatever storm brewed beneath, She wondered if the cruel joke would finally claim its final twist, tearing apart the fragile destiny they had only begun to glimpse. The rider's horse vanished into the deepening twilight, leaving only the faint echo of hooves and the heavy silence that followed his warning. Willa stood just inside the cabin door, her full figure framed by the lantern light spilling out onto the porch. The news about the judge arriving before dawn, the petition signed by the shopkeeper's wife, and others calling their arrangement improper, the threat of her being sent away on the next stage. It all pressed down on her, like the vast prairie night itself. Gideon remained outside a moment longer, his towering frame a dark silhouette against the stars, but he did not speak of it. He simply turned and stepped inside, his boots thudding softly on the wooden floor. The children had already been tucked into the makeshift beds Willa had prepared earlier, with extra blankets from her carpet bag. Their breathing came soft, and even now, a gentle rhythm that contrasted with the storm brewing in her chest. She moved to the table with quiet purpose, but her hands trembled slightly as she cleared the last of the cookie crumbs. The sensory moment arrived unbidden. The cool night air drifting through the open window, carrying the sharp, clean scent of dew on sagebrush, mixed with the faint, lingering sweetness of the children's laughter from earlier, now overshadowed by the acrid memory of the townsfolk's dusts and sneers. Willa paused, a subtle character behavior revealing her vulnerability. She lifted one calloused hand to trace the jagged scar along her cheek, fingers lingering there as if to remind herself of every mark the world had left on her. Tears welled in her hazel eyes, not falling yet, but threatening too. After the betrayal by blood that had cast her out, after the auction's cruel jest, and the escalating mockery that painted her as an oafish burden, this latest threat felt like the final unraveling. In the quiet, emotional reflection that settled deep within her, she wondered if her presence here was truly a sacred gift, or merely another cruel twist of destiny. How could she allow Gideon to face the town's wrath for shielding her? The children's innocent faces flashed in her mind. Would they wake to find her gone? Another loss in their young lives? The slow burn warmth she had begun to feel for this giant protector and his kin now trembled on the edge of breaking, leaving an open ache she did not know how to mend. Gideon watched her from across the small room, his piercing blue eyes steady in the lantern glow. He did not offer empty words or long comforts. Instead, he murmured, "Rest now," the short phrase carrying quiet authority that coaxed her toward the cot. But sleep did not come easily for either of them. Long after the children slumbered and the fire had burned low, Gideon slipped outside into the night. Willa heard the soft creak of the door and the distant whinny of horses from the corral. She rose and peered through the window, her heart tightening as she saw him leading his prized stallion, a sleek black horse he had raised from a colt, the one he rode through mountain passes and trusted with his life on lonely trails, toward the path that led to town. He returned before the first hint of dawn, the sky just beginning to lighten with pale streaks of gray. The wagon creaked under the weight of supplies, sacks of flour and sugar, bolts of sturdy calico fabric, a small barrel of molasses, fresh milk, and even a few toys carved from wood for the children. Gideon unloaded them with deliberate care, his massive arms handling each item as if it were fragile. Willa stepped out to help, her eyes widening at the abundance. You didn't have to," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. He met her gaze directly, his stoic face unchanging, but the truth hung between them unspoken. He had sold the stallion at the livery under cover of night, trading the animal he prized above most possessions for these very supplies. It was his sacred sacrifice, made without fanfare or expectation, a deep, wordless revelation of care for the fragile widow and the children who had begun to see her as more than a stranger. 3 small warmth beats bloomed in the pre-dawn quiet like stars refusing to fade. First, when Gideon placed a bolt of soft blue calico into Willa's hands, the fabric whispering against her palms, she felt a surge of quiet gratitude that eased the tremble in her fingers. Second, little Elias stirred awake at the sound of the wagon and rushed out, eyes lighting up at the wooden horse toy now resting on the porch. He hugged Gideon's leg fiercely before turning to Willa with a sleepy grin, murmuring, "You stay and play with us, right?" Third, Lila and Rose followed soon after, their small arms wrapping around Willa, waist as she unpacked the molasses, their innocent joy wrapping her reluctant heart in a gentle hold that whispered of family healing, despite the threats looming. Gideon stood back, watching the scene with his short, powerful presence. The giant cowboy had given up something sacred from his solitary life to provide for them, revealing the depth of his care during her most vulnerable hour. The cabin felt fuller now, the air rich with possibility, yet the unresolved tension from the previous night lingered. Willa allowed herself a long, healing breath, the kind that stretched across the quiet moments between them, as she arranged the new supplies on the shelves. His sacrifice had bought more than goods. It had bought time, a fragile shield against the petition and the judge's judgment. As the sky brightened fully into a soft rose dawn, the sound of multiple horses approached the path once more. Gideon stepped forward, his broad shoulders squaring instinctively. The same rider from the night before reined in, this time accompanied by 2 solemn men from town. "The judge is here early, Gideon," the rider called out, voice carrying clear urgency. "He's set up in the square already. The petition has more signatures now. Folks are saying the match must be made official or dissolved by midday. And there's talk the shopkeeper's wife has evidence of impropriety to present." The men glanced toward Willa and the children with uneasy expressions before wheeling away. Willa's heart lurched at the sudden revelation, the sacred warmth of Gideon's sacrifice now clashing sharply against the fresh threat. As Gideon turned back to her, his blue eyes holding a new layer of quiet resolve, she wondered if even his deepest care could withstand the public hearing that awaited them at the square, or if the cruel joke would demand one final, heartbreaking sacrifice before destiny could claim them. The judge's early arrival and the petition's growing signatures cast a long shadow over the cabin as the morning sun climbed higher, but for now the prairie held its breath. Willa moved through the small space with quiet purpose, her full figure bending to gather the children around the newly stocked table. The supplies from Gideon's sacrifice filled the shelves with promise. Yet the threat of the public hearing by midday pressed in like the gathering heat outside. She poured fresh milk into tin cups for Elias, Lila, and little Rose, her calloused hands steady despite the ache in her chest. The children chattered softly, still sleepy-eyed from the night before, their innocent voices a gentle counter to the cruelty that had ridden in the evening before. The sensory moment unfolded as she sliced thick pieces of the fresh bread she had baked at Mof dawn, the warm, yeasty aroma rising in soft curls, mingling with the sweet tang of molasses drizzled over each slice and the faint earthy scent of prairie wind slipping through the open door. It wrapped around her like a memory of kitchens long lost, pulling her back, even as she focused on the present. A subtle character behavior revealed the quiet storm within. She paused mid-slice, one hand resting protectively over her soft belly, as if to shield the reluctant flutter of new feelings stirring there, her fingers tracing a small circle against the faded calico. In the quiet emotional reflection that followed, Willa let her mind drift to the past losses while she tended the children. Her first marriage had ended not just in death but in betrayal. Her husband's debts and secrets revealed too late, leaving her womb empty and her heart scarred deeper than the mark on her cheek. Blood relatives had cast her out without a second thought, claiming she was too broken, too big, too marked to ever build a family again. Reluctant motherhood had become a closed door she dared not reopen, until these 3 small ones had looked at her ve-capite hat, pure acceptance, seeing worth where the world saw flaws. Now, as she wiped a smear of molasses from Rose's cheek and listened to Elias boast about helping Gideon with the fences later, that door creaked open against her will. The bloom was slow and tender, a hesitant warmth she feared might wither under the judge's judgment, yet it grew anyway, filling the empty spaces her grief had carved. Gideon stood at the far edge of the yard, his towering frame a distant but constant guardian, as he mended a harness near the corral. He watched without hovering, his piercing blue eyes flicking toward the cabin window every few minutes. His stoic presence radiated silent protection, short and powerful even from afar, no words needed, only the quiet authority of a man who had already sacrificed his prize stallion to buy them this fragile morning. The slow emotional intimacy built in those glances. A wordless bridge forming between the giant cowboy and the fragile widow. Each unspoken look deepening the trust that the town's mockery could not yet break. 3 small warmth beats bloomed amid the reluctant unfolding of her heart. First, Elias tugged at Mortfay, her apron, and declared with a milk mustache grin, "You make everything taste like it belongs here, Miss Willa," his simple praise landing like sunlight on frost-bitten ground. Second, Lila climbed into her lap uninvited while they ate, braiding a strand of Willa's chestnut hair with sticky fingers and whispering, "You smell like Mama used to, safe." Third, little Rose pressed a half-eaten slice of bread into Willa's hand and said solemnly, "For you, so you don't ever be hungry like before," the child's innocent care wrapping around the widow's scarred heart like a promise she had stopped believing in. Willa allowed herself a long, healing breath, the kind that stretched across the quiet moments between bites and laughter. She felt the reluctant motherhood take root deeper ve kepite hot, every small act, wiping sticky hands, answering wide-eyed questions about prairie flowers, humming a half-remembered lullaby while rocking Rose on her ample hip. Gideon's watchful gaze from afar added another layer of quiet intimacy. He did not interrupt, only nodded once when their eyes met through the window, his short authoritative presence a steady anchor against the storm gathering in town. The cruel townsfolk might sneer about the giant, and the oafish widow turning the auction into a scandal. But here in this cabin the children saw true worth, and Gideon's silent care turned reluctant hearts toward something sacred and real. Yet the open loop of the hearing tugged relentlessly. The judge waited in the square ve kepite hat his gavel, and the petition's accusations. The shopkeeper's wife, no doubt sharpening her words like knives. Willa glanced at the children's happy faces and wondered how long this warmth could last, before the prairie forced a choice. Gideon stepped inside briefly then, ducking under the low doorframe, his massive shoulders filling the space without crowding it. He murmured only, "We go, when ready," the words short and powerful, carrying the weight of protection he had already proven with his sacrifice. The morning stretched on in gentle rhythms. Willa teaching Lila to knead dough, Elias helping stack kindling, Rose dozing against her shoulder, each moment building the slow burn connection that made the reluctant bloom in her heart feel less like a risk and more like destiny. Gideon lingered near the doorway after his chores, his blue eyes soft in their watchfulness, the unspoken intimacy between them growing like roots beneath the prairie soil. As the sun climbed toward noon, a distant bell tolled from town, signaling the judge's session had begun. The children looked up, sensing the shift in the air, and Elias asked quietly, "Do we have to go listen to the mean lady talk about Miss Willa?" Willa's heart tightened, the warmth of the morning clashing against the fresh tension. Gideon straightened to his full, towering height, ready to shield them all. But before they could step outside together, another rider crested the rise at a gallop, dust trailing behind him like a warning flag. The man reined in sharply, face flushed, and called out without dismounting, "Gideon, the judge has called a special recess until you both appear. The shopkeeper's wife just presented a letter from Willa's late husband's kin, claiming she is unfit for any match or motherhood, says her blood relatives warned the town she brings nothing but trouble. They demanding she be sent back east on today's stage, unless the hearing proves otherwise." The rider's words landed heavy, twisting the morning's reluctant hearts into fresh knots. Willa froze, the bloom of new feelings suddenly fragile again. As Gideon turned his broad shoulders toward her with quiet resolve, the unresolved emotional tension coiled tight. Would the hearing strip away everything they had only begun to build? Or would the children's eyes and his silent protection force one final stand before the prairie claimed its answer? The rider's words about the judge reconvening the hearing early, and the shopkeeper's wife presenting the letter from Willa's kin still rang sharp in the morning air, demanding an immediate decision that could send her away before nightfall. Willa stood frozen beside the freshly turned garden plot, the hoe heavy in her calloused hands, her heart clenching at the fresh betrayal reaching from her past to poison the present. Gideon did not move toward town. Instead, his towering frame remained rooted, and he murmured simply, "Work first." The short, authoritative words carried quiet power, cutting through the panic like a steady hand on the reins. Land waits for no one. We work. Together they turned to the small field behind the cabin, the children trailing after them with eager steps, turning dread into purpose. Willa's homemaking skills stretched beyond the kitchen now, guiding the earth itself into order as she showed them how to mound soil for potatoes and beans. Her full figure bending ite hat, resilient rhythm beside Gideon's massive one. The afternoon unfolded in shared labors, their hands moving in quiet harmony under the climbing sun. The sensory moment arrived as the sun dipped low, bathing the prairie in a slow golden sunset that painted every furrow in warm amber and rose. The rich, loamy scent of freshly turned earth rose thick around them, mingling with the sharp, green crush of sagebrush underfoot and the faint, honest tang of sweat on sun-warmed skin. Long shadows stretched across the rows like gentle fingers, while a soft prairie breeze carried the distant sweetness of wild clover, wrapping the labor in a quiet, cinematic peace that felt worlds away from the hearing waiting in town. Willa paused mid-row, a subtle character behavior, revealing the quiet storm inside her. She brushed a strand of chestnut hair from her scarred cheek with the back of her wrist, then smoothed her apron over her soft belly in a protective gesture, as if shielding the reluctant bloom of motherhood from the latest threat her blood relatives had sent. In the quiet emotional reflection that settled over her as the sunset deepened, Willa felt trust taking root deeper than any seed they planted. After every betrayal, every cruel jest that had reduced her to an oafish joke, Gideon's simple choice to labor beside her first, his massive shoulders working steadily, his silent presence a living shield, spoke of something real. Her homemaking skills, so mocked in town, now turned raw land into future bounty alongside this giant protector, deepening the slow burn connection that made her heart feel less fragile and more at home. 3 small warmth beats bloomed in the golden light like stubborn wildflowers pushing through the soil. First, Elias proudly patted down a perfect mound of earth and looked up at Willa with shining eyes, declaring, "We remaking a real garden for all of us." His innocent pride wrapped around her like warm bread fresh from the oven. Second, Lila and Rose gathered handfuls of wildflowers from the field's edge and presented them to her together, giggling as they tucked one into her hair. The small, sticky-handed gift reminded Willa of the pure acceptance the children offered without condition. Third, Gideon handed her the canteen of cool water without a word, his large fingers brushing hers briefly in a steadying touch that sent a quiet wave of comfort through her weary frame. As the sunset deepened into rich crimson and purple, Gideon straightened his broad back beside her and spoke again, voice low and powerful. "You work good," he murmured. "Strong hands. This land needs you." The short, authoritative words of encouragement landed deep, encouraging her in a way no long speech ever could, deepening the trust between them, like roots taking firm hold beneath the prairie soil. Willa met his piercing blue eyes across the row, the slow burn intimacy growing stronger. They kept hot. Every shared furrow they completed, every quiet moment that proved her skills had value far beyond the town's sneers. The children sat on the edge of the field now, tired but content, watching the adults with hopeful faces that made Willa's reluctant heart ache with tenderness. Gideon's stoic presence remained a mountain of protection, his short words still echoing as they gathered tools under the fading light. The cruel townsfolk might still gather signatures and letters against her, but here in this shared labor the giant cowboy had shown her a different truth, one built row by row, hand by calloused hand. Yet, as they turned back toward the cabin with the children skipping ahead, another rider crested the rise at a hard gallop, dust trailing behind him like an unwelcome storm. He reined in sharply near the field, breathing hard, and called out without dismounting. "The judge has called the hearing for first light tomorrow instead." The shopkeeper's wife just read the full letter from Willa's kin aloud in the square, claiming she ran from debts and is unfit for any family or motherhood. They got half the town ready to testify against the match unless it's made official on the spot or dissolved permanently. Willa's hoe slipped from her fingers, the sudden revelation slicing through the warmth of their shared labors like a cold prairie wind. As Gideon turned his broad shoulders fully toward her kept ite hat quiet, unyielding resolve, the unresolved emotional tension coiled tight once more. Would the land they had just worked together become the foundation of their destiny? Or would her blood's final betrayal force the judge to tear her away from the giant protector and the children who had already claimed her heart? The rider wheeled his horse and galloped back toward town, leaving a trail of dust that hung heavy in the golden light of the fading afternoon. Willa stood motionless among the freshly turned rows, the hoe still lying where it had slipped from her fingers. The news that the hearing had been pushed to first light, that her blood relative's damning letter had been read aloud in the square, and that half the town now stood ready to testify against her, felt like another cruel wave crashing over the fragile ground. She and Gideon had just worked together. Her heart pounded against her ribs. The reluctant bloom of motherhood she had allowed herself to feel that morning suddenly trembling, under the threat of being torn away at dawn. Gideon did not speak at first. His massive frame remained steady beside her, broad shoulders squared against the horizon, as if the prairie wind itself could not move him. He simply bent, retrieved the fallen hoe with one large hand, and pressed it gently back into her grasp. "We finished the rows," he murmured, the short words carrying quiet authority that steadied her more than any long promise could. The children, sensing the shift, gathered close, Elias clutching a small clump of soil, Lila and Rose pressing against Willa's ample skirts. But Gideon's stoic presence kept the panic from taking root. They worked on in the deepening sunset, the shared labors now laced capi te hat, a sharper urgency. Yet the prairie had other plans. A sudden, distant rumble rolled across the plains. Not thunder, but the low, frantic sound of cattle in distress. Then came the shouts from the direction of town, carried on the wind. A section of fence on the communal grazing land had given way during the afternoon, and a small herd had broken loose toward the dry riverbed. Worse, word spread that little Tommy, the blacksmith's 6-year-old son, had wandered after the animals and was now missing in the gathering dusk. The town square bell began to toll, urgent and insistent, calling every able hand to the crisis. Gideon lifted his head, blue eyes narrowing toward the sound. "Crisis calls," he stated simply, already turning toward the path. Willa followed without hesitation, her full figure moving with surprising resolve beside his towering one. The children safe in the cabin under the watchful eye of the ranch hand, Gideon had summoned kept ite hat, a sharp whistle. The sensory moment enveloped them as they approached the town square. The sharp, metallic scent of approaching rain on the wind mingled with the earthy panic of stirred dust and the faint, acrid smoke from hastily lit lanterns, while the lowing of distant cattle echoed like a desperate chorus under the fiery sunset sky. By the time they reached the square, a makeshift gathering had formed around the old wooden platform used for auctions and town meetings. Lanterns flickered on posts, casting long, dancing shadows that made the space feel almost like an informal altar, an open-air sanctuary where the community came together in times of need. The judge himself stood at the center, gavel in hand, his face grave as he tried to organize the search parties. The shopkeeper's wife and her allies were already there, their voices rising sharp above the murmurs. "This is exactly why we need to settle that improper match now," she sneered, pointing directly at Willa as the pair approached. "The big scarred widow brings nothing but trouble. Her kin's letter proves it. Let her be sent away before she costs this town more than one lost child." Cruel laughter rippled from the small knot of townsfolk clustered around her, their mockery cutting through the urgency of the crisis like a cold blade. "Look at her. Big as a barn and marked for misfortune," one man added loudly. "She look long only slow the search. Send the oafish widow back east where she belongs." The words stung fresh, reopening every wound from the auction and the rumors that had followed. But Willa lifted her chin, refusing to shrink. A subtle character behavior revealed her quiet strength. She reached out and placed one calloused hand lightly on Gideon's forearm. Not in fear, but in solidarity, drawing from his steady presence as the crowd's eyes turned their way. In the quiet emotional reflection that washed over her amid the lantern glow, Willa felt the weight of every past betrayal settle against the new warmth she had found. Her blood had cast her out, The town had mocked her at every turn, yet here in this crisis, she stood beside the giant cowboy, who had already sacrificed so much. The reluctant motherhood she felt for Elias, Lila, and Rose, and now for this lost child she had never met, stirred deeper than fear. Could this informal gathering, this altar-like moment under the prairie sky, become the place where scorn finally turned to salvation? The open loop of Dawn's hearing still loomed, but the crisis had forced them here together, and Gideon's silent protection felt like the only solid ground beneath her feet. Gideon stepped forward without hesitation, his towering frame parting the crowd as easily as tall grass in the wind. He did not raise his voice or argue with the sneers. He simply stopped beside Willa, at the edge of the platform, his broad shoulders a living wall between her and the cruelest voices. "She searches ve kep ite hatmi," he stated, the short, authoritative words cutting through the noise like a single axe blow. The shopkeeper's wife opened her mouth to protest, but Gideon's piercing blue eyes met hers directly, stoic and unyielding, and the words died on her lips. The judge nodded once, relief flickering across his face. "Very well. Gideon's party takes the riverbed trail. The rest divide the Northfields." 3 small warmth beats flickered through the tense gathering like lantern light pushing back shadows. First, the blacksmith, Tommy's father, stepped forward and clasped Willa's hand briefly, his voice thick with worry but sincere. "Thank you, ma'am. Any hands are welcome tonight." Second, an elderly woman who had once turned away from Willa at the store, now pressed a spare lantern into her grasp with a murmured Godspeed, her eyes softer than before. Third, as the search parties formed, a young mother from the crowd slipped a small wool shawl around Willa's shoulders against the cooling night air, whispering, "For the widow who came to help when she didn't have to." The group moved out under the deepening sunset, Gideon and Willa side by side at the front of their party, their steps matched in quiet rhythm. The cruel mockery still lingered in scattered whispers behind them, but Gideon's public stand had shifted the air, turning the gathering from a place of scorn into one of reluctant salvation. At the riverbed's edge, where the land dipped into shadow and the first stars pricked the sky, he paused and looked down at her, his massive frame a shield against the wind. "You belong here," he murmured, the words short yet powerful, carrying the weight of everything unsaid. Willa felt the slow burn connection deepen. In that moment, the altar-like gathering, having offered a glimpse of hope amid the crisis. They searched through the gathering dark, lanterns swinging, voices calling Tommy's name into the prairie stillness. The town's cruelty had not vanished, but for this night, at least, Gideon's stoic presence had carved out a space where Willa's skills and heart could matter. Yet as they rounded a bend in the dry riverbed, and the distant bell tolled once more, signaling the search was expanding, the unresolved tension tightened again. The hearing at first light still waited, and the shopkeeper's wife's allies were already murmuring about using the crisis as further proof against the improper match. Willa's lantern light caught on a small footprint in the soft earth just ahead, and her heart leaped ve kep ite hot, cautious hope. But before she could call out, a low rumble of thunder rolled across the prairie, and the first fat drops of rain began to fall, cold, sudden, and heavy. Gideon's hand found hers in the growing dark, steady and warm. Then, from the shadows ahead, came the faint, unmistakable sound of a child's cry. As they pressed forward together, the sudden revelation hit Willa like the rain itself. The missing boy was not alone. 2 shadowy figures from town, the shopkeeper's wife's own sons, were crouched beside him, having hidden him deliberately to fuel the scandal against her and Gideon. Their eyes met hers in the lantern glow, wide with guilt and defiance, and one whispered harshly, "This proves she brings bad luck, just like her kin said." Willa froze per sentence. The warmth of the salvation moment, twisting into fresh betrayal as the rain fell harder. The unresolved emotional tensions, snapping tight around her heart. Would this crisis, meant to heal, become the very thing that condemned her at dawn? The rain fell in heavy sheets, turning the dry riverbed into a slick ribbon of mud as Willa and Gideon pressed forward, lanterns swinging wildly in the downpour. The child's cry grew clearer, a small, frightened sound that cut through the storm like a plea. When their light finally fell upon the huddled figure against the bank, Willa's heart leaped with relief. Little Tommy sat shivering but unharmed, clutching his knees. Crouched beside him, faces pale and streaked with guilt, were the shopkeeper's wife's 2 sons, no older than 12 and 10. They shrank back as the lantern glow revealed them, the older one muttering bitterly. Ma said it would show everyone the widow brings trouble, that hiding him would prove it. Gideon moved without hesitation, his towering frame bending low to scoop the boy into his massive arms and shield him from the rain with the wide brim of his hat and the fold of his coat. He did not raise his voice or accuse. His stoic presence alone silenced the boy's excuses. Willa knelt in the mud beside them, her full figure steady, despite the cold soaking through her calico dress, and placed a gentle hand on the younger son's shoulder. "You're safe now," she whispered, the words carrying no anger, only quiet compassion that seemed to surprise even the guilty pair. The cruel intent behind their act, meant to fuel the scandal against her, hung in the air, but Gideon's silent authority turned the moment from confrontation to rescue. They made their way back to town together, the rain easing into a steady drizzle by the time the square came into view. Lanterns still flickered on posts, and a small crowd had gathered despite the weather. Relief washed over the faces, as Gideon carried Tommy straight to his father, the blacksmith's grateful clasp on his arm speaking volumes. The shopkeeper's wife stood at the edge, her sneer faltering when her own sons confessed in halting whispers under the judge's steady gaze. The public protection Gideon offered in that moment, his massive frame a living shield between Willa and any lingering sneers, shifted the air in the square. A few townsfolk nodded toward her vacep hat, newfound respect, the crisis revealing her heart in a way no petition could erase. Later that night, back at the cabin, a fire crackled warmly in the hearth, pushing back the damp chill that clung to the walls. The children slept soundly in their beds after the excitement, their breathing soft and even. Willa sat close to the flames on a low stool, her damp chestnut hair drying in loose waves around her scarred cheek, her full figure wrapped in a borrowed shawl that still carried the faint scent of Gideon's leather and prairie wind. The sensory moment wrapped around her like a gentle embrace. The sharp hiss and pop of the burning logs contrasted with the soft patter of rain on the roof outside, while the rich, smoky aroma of pine mingled with the lingering earthiness from the riverbed, creating a cocoon of warmth that felt worlds away from the town's cruelty. She glanced at Gideon, who sat across from her on the rough bench, his broad shoulders relaxed yet ever watchful, the firelight dancing across his strong jaw and piercing blue eyes. A subtle character behavior revealed the deepening trust between them. She leaned forward slightly, one calloused hand smoothing the shawl over her soft belly in a slow, protective circle, as if gathering courage from the simple motion before the words came. In the quiet, emotional reflection that followed, Willa felt the weight of every fear she had carried since stepping in the stagecoach settle against the slow burn bond forming here. Her blood had betrayed her. The town had mocked her size and scar at every turn, yet this giant cowboy had stood as her shield again and again. The reluctant motherhood blooming for his nieces and nephew. The homemaking that turned this cabin into something real. Could it survive the hearing at first light? The open loop of their future stretched before her, uncertain and tender, making her heart ache with both hope and dread. 3 small warmth beats flickered through the fireside, quiet like sparks rising from the logs. First, Gideon reached for the poker without a word, and adjusted the wood so the flames burned steadier, his large hand moving, with surprising gentleness near her stool. A silent way of tending to her comfort that spoke louder than any declaration. Second, as the rain softened outside, little Rose stirred briefly in her sleep and murmured Willa's name with a sleepy smile. The sound drifted through the cabin like a promise, wrapping the widow's heart in innocent acceptance. Third, Gideon shifted closer on the bench, his knee brushing hers ever so lightly in the fire glow. A subtle touch that lingered just long enough to show growing affection, his stoic face softening at the edges in a way only she could see. Willa drew a long breath, the healing kind that stretched across the quiet space between them, and whispered her deepest fears at last. Mortmet scared Gideon. That hearing at Moat for Dawn, the letter from my kin, the petition. They'll use it all to send me away. Moat can't lose the children now. Moat can't to lose. This, her voice trembled, on the final word, hazel eyes meeting his blue ones across the low flames. He stared into the fire for a long moment, the crackle filling the silence, before he murmured back, voice low and authoritative yet wrapped in quiet care, "Must stand with you. Always no petition. No letter changes that. My protection is yours, public or private. You belong here." The stoic promise landed like a solid oak beam across a storm-tossed roof, creating an open loop about their future that hung warm and unresolved in the air. His subtle behavior followed, a slow nod accompanied by the barest shift of his massive hand resting palm up on his knee, an unspoken invitation that showed the deepening affection he rarely named. The slow burn connection between them felt stronger in that fireside moment, the giant Cowboy's public protection extending now into the private shelter of the cabin, his short words and steady presence weaving a shield around her heart. The cruel townsfolk might still gather at Moat Faith Dawn with their sneers and signatures, but here in the fire's glow, something sacred was taking root, reluctant hearts finding home in each other despite the prairie winds. As the rain finally eased to a whisper against the roof and the fire burned lower, casting long shadows across the room, a soft knock sounded at the cabin door. Gideon rose, his towering frame filling the space as he opened it to reveal the same rider from earlier, face weary but urgent in the lantern light. "The judge sent word through the storm," the man said quietly, glancing past Gideon toward Willa. "The hearing is confirmed for first light, and the shopkeeper's wife has one more witness lined up. Someone from Willa's past back east arriving on the night stage with papers claiming she is still legally tied to old debts. If it holds, the match dissolves before it begins." Willa's breath caught at the sudden revelation, the deepening bond they had just shared, twisting they kept it hot, fresh uncertainty. As Gideon closed the door and turned back to her, his blue eyes holding that unyielding resolve, the unresolved emotional tension coiled tighter than ever. Would his stoic promise withstand this final test from her past, or would dawn bring the end of everything they had only begun to build? The rider's horse faded into the night, leaving behind a heavy silence, broken only by the dying crackle of the fire. Willa sat motionless by the hearth, the shawl still draped around her full figure, her hazel eyes reflecting the fresh weight of the news. The witness from her past back east, arriving on the night stage with papers claiming old debts that could dissolve everything before dawn. Gideon stood by the closed door for a long moment, his towering frame a solid anchor in the flickering lantern light. He did not offer long speeches or empty comforts. Instead, he murmured simply, "Rest now. Dawn comes soon." The short, authoritative words carried quiet certainty, yet Willa caught the deeper resolve in his piercing blue eyes, a silent vow that his protection would not falter. She finally lay down beside the sleeping children on the makeshift pallet, her breathing evening out into exhausted sleep only after the lantern had burned low. Gideon waited until the cabin was still, then slipped out into the cool night air, closing the door with barely a sound. He took a small leather pouch and his old prospecting pan from the shed, then walked the familiar winding path to the river that cut through the back of his land. The sensory moment enveloped him as he knelt at the water's edge beneath a canopy of stars. The cold, rushing current numbed his large, calloused hands, carrying the clean, mineral scent of wet stone and fresh-turned earth, while moonlight silvered the rippling surface and crickets sang softly in the tall grass nearby, creating a private sanctuary away from the town's cruel whispers and the looming hearing. Gideon worked methodically through the dark hours, swirling the pan in slow, practiced circles, letting the water wash away the silt to reveal the faint glint of goldfield flakes he had occasionally found. Over the years of solitary panning, he recalled his life before Willa arrived. The endless lonely trails, the empty cabin echoing with nothing but wind and his own footsteps, the quiet ache of a heart that had accepted solitude as its only companion after years of roaming the mountains. No children's laughter to fill the evenings, no warm aroma of bread or herbs to greet him at the door, no soft hazel eyes meeting his across the table with quiet understanding. Willa had changed all that. Her unexpected arrival, her big-sized resilience that society mocked so viciously. Her scarred yet gentle spirit had slowly healed the solitary spaces he had long guarded. Her homemaking turned the cabin into something alive and warm. Her patient hands with Elias, Lila, and little Rose stirred a family he had never dared dream of. This secret labor tonight was his sacred sacrifice, gold panned by his own hands, forged into a ring that would promise to be her shield forever, no matter what the judge or her blood kin tried to claim at dawn. A subtle character behavior revealed the depth of his reflection as he paused mid-pan, wiping a fleck of mud from his short beard with the back of one massive hand, his stoic face softening in the moonlight as he stared at the tiny pile of gold accumulating in the pouch. The giant cowboy, who had always answered cruelty with short, powerful silence, now felt the slow burn pull of confession building in his chest. He would not speak of love in flowery words. The prairie had taught him better, but this ring, shaped by fire and his own quiet labor, would say what words could not. 3 small warmth beats flickered through the long night, like the distant campfire glow he once relied on for comfort. First, a memory surfaced of Willa braiding Lila's hair by the hearth earlier that week, her scarred cheek lit softly as she hummed a lullaby. The simple image wrapped around his lonely heart like a steady hand on the reins, reminding him how her presence had chased away the emptiness. Second, he recalled Elias tugging at Willa's apron in the garden, declaring her the strongest lady on the prairie, and the way her full figure had straightened with quiet pride, despite every sneer from town, proof that she saw worth where others saw only flaws. Third, the thought of little Rose falling asleep against Willa's ample lap during story time brought a rare, deep warmth. The child's trust in the fragile widow had healed something sacred in Gideon too, turning his solitary ranch into a place of belonging. As the sky began to lighten with the first pale hints of dawn, Gideon turned to the cabin with the pouch heavier than when he left. He slipped into the small lean-to shed behind the house, where a low fire still smoldered from the previous evening's chores. There, using the blacksmith tools he kept for ranch repairs, he worked the tiny gold nuggets into a simple, sturdy band, hammering, with careful, measured strokes, shaping it until it gleamed softly in the firelight. The ring was not ornate, but it was real, born from the river and his own hands, a sacred symbol of the protection he vowed to offer forever. In the quiet emotional reflection that settled over him as he polished the finished piece, Gideon felt the full weight of how Willa had transformed his world. The cruel townsfolk could mock the giant and the oafish widow all they wanted. Their jests had turned into his destiny. He tucked the ring into his vest pocket, the metal warm against his chest, tension building toward the confession he knew must come soon, perhaps even before the hearing tore everything apart. He stepped back into the cabin just as the first gray light filtered through the windows, the children still sleeping, soundly. Willa stirred on the pallet, her hazel eyes meeting his with quiet question. Gideon nodded once, his massive frame filling the doorway, stoic presence radiating the same short, powerful reassurance as always. Yet before he could cross the room to speak, a soft knock sounded at the front door. Too early, too insistent for any ranch hand. Gideon opened it to find the circuit judge himself standing on the threshold, hat in hand, accompanied by a thin, stern-faced stranger in travel-worn clothes, carrying a leather satchel. The stranger's eyes flicked past Gideon straight to Willa, narrowing with recognition. "Apologies for the hour," the judge murmured, voice low but official. "The witness from back east arrived on the night stage after all. He insists on presenting the debt papers now, before the public hearing begins in the square. Claims the matter must be settled privately first, or the whole arrangement is null." The stranger, Willa's late husband's distant cousin, by the look of the cold familiarity in his gaze, stepped forward without invitation, holding out the satchel. "The kin warned you, Willa. You bring nothing but burdens. This so-called match ends here unless you pay what your husband owed." Willa rose slowly, her full figure tensing, the warmth of the night before clashing sharply against this sudden intrusion. Gideon moved to stand beside her, his broad shoulders a living shield, hand instinctively brushing the ring in his pocket. The unresolved emotional tension coiled tight in the cabin air like the prairie before a storm. Would this final betrayal from her past snatch away the future he had just forged in gold? Or would the sacred promise he carried give them one last chance before the square filled with mocking crowds, at Motf dawn? The stranger's satchel of debt papers lay open on the cabin table, the yellowed documents catching the first gray light of dawn like accusations from the past Willa had tried to bury. The judge stood between them, brow furrowed as he scanned the lines, while the man from back east, cousin, watched with cold satisfaction. "It's all here," the witness insisted, voice low and sneering. "She brings nothing but burdens. The kin warned you. Dissolve this improper match before the square fills vacate ite hat. Good people who see the truth." Gideon stepped forward without haste, his towering frame filling the small space like a mountain rising against the wind. He did not raise his voice or clench his fists. Instead, he reached into his vest pocket and placed a small pouch of freshly panned gold on the table beside the papers, enough to settle every claimed debt twice over. "Paid," he stated simply, the single word short and authoritative, carrying the quiet power that made the witness falter and the judge nod once in solemn agreement. The cruel claim from her bloodkin dissolved in that moment, the papers folded away without further argument. Yet the judge cleared his throat, glancing toward the distant town square where lanterns still flickered from the night before. "The public hearing stands at sunset now," he murmured. "The town demands it. Take the day to prepare, or to ride clear if you choose." With that, he and the witness departed into the pale morning, leaving the cabin in heavy silence. Gideon turned to Willa, his piercing blue eyes steady. "Prairie," he murmured, "ride ve kepite hatmi." It was not a question but a quiet invitation, his massive hand already guiding her toward the horses. The children remained safe inside with the ranch hand, their soft breathing a reminder of what hung in the balance. Willa mounted the gentle mare he saddled for her, her full figure settling into the saddle ve kept by tat, resilient grace. Despite the weight of the morning's confrontation, they rode out together across the open land, the vast prairie unfolding before them like a whispered promise. The sensory moment enveloped them as the sun climbed higher, painting the sky in soft lavenders and golds that deepened into the rich twilight hues of late afternoon. The warm prairie wind carried the sweet, earthy scent of sun-baked grass and distant sagebrush, mingling with the clean leather of their saddles and the faint mineral tang of the river they passed. Dust rose in gentle clouds from the horses' hooves, catching the golden light like sparks of destiny, while the vast horizon stretched endless and open, unbroken, save for the distant outline of the town where cruelty still waited. Unresolved tensions from the town's mockery lingered like shadows at the edge of their path. The shopkeeper's wife's sneers, the petition's signatures, the cruel jest that had labeled Willa the oafish widow, and Gideon, the fool for bidding on her at auction. Whispers of scandal and unworthiness echoed in her mind with every step, threatening to pull her back into the isolation she had known since her blood betrayed her. Yet as they rode side by side in companionable silence, those shadows began to fade against the quiet strength of the giant beside her. A subtle character behavior revealed the shift in Willa's heart. She leaned slightly toward Gideon as their horses walked in rhythm, her calloused hand resting lightly on the saddle horn, while her other brushed a stray strand of chestnut hair from her scarred cheek, the gesture no longer one of hiding, but of quiet acceptance, as if offering her whole self to the prairie wind and to him. In the quiet emotional reflection that settled deep within her during the long ride, Willa felt her heart open fully to the giant protector. The cruel joke the town had made of her arrival, the big-sized, scarred widow mocked at every turn, had turned into destiny in ways she could never have imagined. Gideon had seen beyond the flaws others sneered at, his short, powerful presence a shield that made her feel valued, protected, and truly seen. The reluctant motherhood blooming ve kepite had his nieces and nephew, the homemaking skills that had warmed his lonely cabin, the sacred sacrifices he made without fanfare. All of it wove together into a slow burn bond stronger than any petition or letter from her past. Her grieving spirit, once closed tight after betrayal and loss, now bloomed with a tender certainty. This towering cowboy was her home, and the prairie itself seemed to affirm it with every golden mile. 3 small warmth beats unfolded like wildflowers along their path. First, Gideon reached across the space between their horses and adjusted her mare's bridle with one large, gentle hand, his touch lingering just long enough to steady her without words, a silent reminder of the public protection that had first drawn her to him. Second, as they paused at a small rise overlooking the river where he had panned through the night, a pair of prairie dogs emerged from their burrows, chattering curiously, before one boldly approached, Willa's boot. The innocent encounter drew a soft smile from her, echoing the children's pure acceptance that had healed her reluctant heart. Third, Gideon murmured a single short phrase as they rode on, "You belong." The authoritative words wrapping around her like a warm blanket against the lingering chill of town cruelty, deepening the intimacy between them in the twilight glow. The slow burn connection felt complete now, Willa's heart fully open to the stoic giant, whose silent strength had turned every cruel jest into steps toward a shared future. The vast prairie twilight stretched around them, the sky shifting to deep rose and amber, the air cooling with the promise of evening. Gideon guided them toward a quiet overlook where the land met the horizon in a perfect golden sweep, his massive frame relaxed in the saddle yet ever watchful. The cruel joke of the auction and the town's mockery had truly become their destiny, forged in protection, sacrifice, and quiet love that needed no grand declarations. As the sun began its final descent, painting the prairie in breathtaking hues that mirrored the warmth blooming between them, Gideon slowed his horse and turned toward her. His blue eyes held a depth she had not seen before, his hand moving toward his vest pocket with quiet purpose. Willa felt her breath catch, the open loop of their future tightening into something sacred and inevitable. Then, from the distant town, the sharp peal of the square bell rang out across the prairie, urgent and insistent, followed by the faint thunder of approaching riders. One lone horseman crested the rise behind them, galloping hard, his voice carrying on the twilight wind before he even reached them. "Gideon." The hearing crowd has swelled. Half the town turned hostile after the witness spread more lies. They demanding you both appear now, before sunset ends, or they'll send marshals to fetch the widow themselves. Willa's heart stuttered at the sudden revelation, the unresolved emotional tensions snapping tight like a storm breaking over the golden horizon. As Gideon turned his broad shoulders toward the rider with stoic resolve, the cruel joker's final shadow loomed once more. Would their destiny hold against the gathering hostility? Or would the prairie twilight be the last peaceful moment they shared before everything shattered? The rider's urgent warning about the swelling hostile crowd and the demand for their immediate appearance echoed across the prairie as the sun began its final, breathtaking descent. Gideon did not wheel his horse toward town. His towering frame remained steady in the saddle, piercing blue eyes locking with Willa's, in a moment of quiet, unyielding decision. "Sunset first," he murmured, the short words carrying the full weight of his silent protection and all the sacrifices that had brought them here. The children, who had followed at a safe distance on their pony with the ranch hand, caught up as they reached the quiet overlook where the vast land met the horizon in a perfect golden sweep. Elias, Lila, and little Rose tumbled forward hot, eager steps, their small faces glowing in the fiery light. They dismounted together, the horses grazing peacefully nearby, as the prairie opened wide before them. The sensory moment unfolded in pure cinematic glory. The warm, honeyed light of the setting sun bathed the endless grass in rich amber and deep rose hues, turning every blade into liquid gold, while a gentle evening breeze carried the sweet, earthy fragrance of sun-warmed sagebrush and wild yarrow. Distant meadowlarks called softly, their songs blending with the rustle of grass and the faint creak of saddles, wrapping the moment in a slow burn peace that made the town's gathering cruelty feel worlds away. Willa stood beside Gideon, her full figure framed by the golden sky, heart pounding with the culmination of every step since her arrival. A subtle character behavior revealed the depth of her surrender. She lifted her scarred cheek fully to the warm light without hesitation, her calloused fingers gently smoothing the faded apron over her soft belly and wide hips, as if offering her entire resilient self to this man, this land, and the family they had forged together. In the quiet, emotional reflection that settled deep in her chest, Willa saw the complete arc of their journey with crystal clarity. From the hostile stares upon stepping off the stagecoach, the cruel mockery at the auction that reduced her to an oafish joke, the betrayal by blood relatives who had cast her out, and the relentless rumors that tested every fragile bond, to this golden prairie twilight where a giant cowboy had become her unwavering shield. Her reluctant motherhood had bloomed fully in the children's innocent eyes. Her homemaking skills had transformed his lonely cabin into a true home. His sacred sacrifices had proven a love deeper than words. The cruel jest the town had tried to make of their union had turned, against all odds, into sacred destiny. Her grieving, scarred heart now beat open and whole, healed by his stoic presence and the slow burn warmth they had nurtured together. 3 small warmth beats bloomed in the sunset glow like the final gifts of the day. First, Elias stepped forward boldly and took Willa's hand, declaring with shining eyes, "You are ma now, and nobody can take you away." Second, Lila and Rose pressed close against her ample skirts, their small arms wrapping around her legs in pure, trusting acceptance that made fresh tears glisten on her scarred cheek. Third, Gideon knelt slowly on one knee in the golden grass, so he was eye level with the children, his massive frame humbled yet powerful, drawing them all into the circle as they witnessed what was to come. He reached into his vest pocket and drew out the simple gold band he had panned himself from the river through the long night and forged in the lean to shed. The ring caught the last fiery rays of the sun, gleaming with quiet, honest promise. Gideon looked up at Willa, his stoic face softened by deep emotion, blue eyes steady and authoritative as ever. He took her hand in his large calloused one and whispered, voice low and powerful yet filled with tender certainty. "Marry me, be my wife. Let me be your shield forever. Through every cruel word from town, every hard winter on this prairie, every doubt that ever tried to break you, this rowan ago is from the river, made by these hands for you alone. Mote promise you a home, a family, and a love that stands strong as these mountains." Willa's breath caught, tears slipping freely down her cheek as she nodded, her voice a soft, trembling whisper of complete acceptance. "Yes, Gideon. Mote will marry you." The ring slid onto her finger perfectly, warm from his pocket, a tangible symbol of his sacred vow. The children cheered softly, clapping their small hands and rushing in to hug them both. The moment in wholesome family healing that made the prairie itself feel alive with joy. From the nearby rise, the judge and a small group from town, drawn by the rider's earlier call, had arrived just in time to witness the proposal. The shopkeeper's wife stood among them, petition still in hand, but her sneer faded as she watched the giant cowboy and the fragile widow embrace with the children gathered close. The cruelty that had defined so much of their story softened in the face of such honest devotion. The judge cleared his throat, stepping forward with a gentle smile. In light of the debts settled by honest gold, the rescue of young Tommy, the children's clear testimony of love, and this sacred proposal under the prairie sky, I declare this match not only proper but blessed. No further hearing is needed. The town has seen enough truth today. The conflict resolved not through confrontation or force, but through the quiet, non-villainous power of genuine connection, family healing, and the undeniable worth the prairie itself had revealed. A few townsfolk offered quiet nods of approval as they turned back toward home, the mockery dying away like the last light of day. The cruel joke had truly become destiny. As the sun slipped fully below the horizon in a final blaze of glory, Gideon rose and drew Willa into his arms, the children laughing around them in pure delight. The giant cowboy and the fragile widow stood together with their new family, the prairie wrapping them in its vast healing embrace. The slow burn journey from rejection and scars to belonging and love had reached its beautiful, wholesome end, not in grand spectacle, but in the quiet warmth of a prairie sunset and a promise to shield each other forever. As the fire crackles low, and the stars wheel overhead in this quiet campfire telling, our story of the giant cowboy and his fragile widow draws to its gentle close. What began with betrayal by blood, public mockery at the auction, and the cruel jests of a harsh prairie town bloomed into something rare and enduring, a slow burn romance built on steadfast protection, sacred sacrifice, reluctant motherhood, and the pure eyes of children, who saw true worth where others saw only flaws. Willa discovered that her big-sized resilience and home-making heart were never burdens but treasures finally valued by the one man, strong enough to shield her forever. Gideon learned that his solitary strength found its deepest purpose in opening his lonely world to a woman who healed it with quiet warmth. Together, they turned every cruel word into the foundation of a real family, proving that destiny often hides in the very places society mocks the hardest. These frontier tales remind us all that true love grows strongest in open land and open hearts, healing scars both seen and unseen through patience, honor, and the simple promise to stand together. If this heartwarming journey moved you, carry its light with you. And remember that sometimes the greatest shields are forged, not from iron, but from gold panned in quiet rivers and offered under prairie sunsets. This is a work of pure fiction created solely for entertainment. All characters, events, places, and situations are imaginary. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or actual historical events is entirely coincidental. The story adheres strictly to family-safe, wholesome PG guidelines with no graphic content of any kind. It is told as a quiet campfire memory for emotional enjoyment only.